إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله ولا تموتون إلا وأنتم مسلمون. Dear brothers and sisters, I bear witness that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah, and Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is his last and final messenger. Today, dear brothers and sisters, I want to talk about how in society we've all become zombies. And when I say zombies, I'm not talking about werewolves and vampires and that type of zombie. I'm talking about the mindless creature. We go around thoughtless. We go through the day, we don't even know what happened in that day. Why? Because we're out there, we're looking through our cell phones, we're text messaging, all these things. I've gone to playgrounds, myself included sometimes. We pick up the phone, we're looking at a text message or an email. Your kids are playing right in front of you and you don't even enjoy that. You don't appreciate that. We don't contemplate on the beauty of Allah's creation around us. And if we keep doing that, living this mindless lifestyle, what are we going to be? We might be the companions of the blaze. It says in the Quran, وَقَالُوا لَوْ كُنَّا نَسْمَعُ أَوْ نَعْقِلْ مَا كُنَّا فِي أَصْحَابِ السَّعِيرِ. Now this is in Surah Al-Mulk. And they will say, if only we had been listening or reasoning, we would not be among the companions of the blaze. Listening or reasoning, thinking. And Allah used the word aw, or. If we do one or another, listen to the commandments of Allah. Or reason, think, contemplate, look around you. You know, it looks like it's going to rain outside. SubhanAllah, we had a very harsh winter this year. And everything died around us. Right? The trees, there was no leaves on the trees. The grass was getting yellow and stale. So I could actually let my kids, I live near a park, I can let them play in the park because I can see them clearly. But once spring hit, everything got full up. Do we contemplate on that? That Allah has resurrected from nothing, something? Are we reflecting on the ayat in the Quran? As we know, Ramadan is only a few days away, a week or so away. Are we prepared to reflect on the ayat that will be said in the Quran? Or are we just sitting there doing a checklist in Ramadan? Fasting, check. Pray my 5 prayers, check. Taraweeh, check. Khatam al-Quran, check. Sometimes we focus on these checks and we don't focus on the essentials. The essentials of understanding, feeling, breathing the Quran. We don't listen to the words that the Imam is saying. We just want to make sure he's done. So you could put on your checklist, I did the khatam at the end of Ramadan. I know some people go to masajid that might do khatam 3 times. And you go to those masajid and the reciter is reading so fast. There's no way you can understand and reflect upon those ayat. Instead, we should reflect upon the ayat. And if Arabic isn't your maiden tongue, you know the order that the Imam is going to go. You know what juz he's in. Read before you come to that day. Read the whole juz. And you'll pick up a few words that you might understand, like Bani Israel, Musa, Isa. You hear these words and you say, oh, I remember reading about that part. I know what they're talking about right now. It goes in every language. You'll understand it in English, Urdu, Farsi, whatever language you speak, you'll understand a few of those words and you can understand the meaning of the Quran. Which brings me to today's topic. It says in the Quran, وَأَوْحَى رَبُّكَ إِلَى النَّحْلِ إِنْ أَتَّخِذِي مِنَ الْجِبَالِ وَبِيُوتًا وَمِنَ الشَّجْرِ وَمِمَّا يَعْرِشُونَ. And your Lord inspired the bee to take for itself among the mountains houses and among the trees and that which they have built. Wow, an ayah about the bee. What's so significant about this? The way the ayah starts, وَأَوْحَى, Allah is giving wahi to what? A bee, an insect. An insignificant insect that we don't even think about. Unless it's around us, where sometimes most of us are scared and we run away. But Allah is giving wahy to a bee. Inspiration. We know Allah gives wahy to what? The angels, the prophets. And now it's to a bee, giving wahy to a bee, inspiration to a bee. Maybe we should analyze this ayah. Analyze what the bee does. SubhanAllah, we know we what? Love honey. If it wasn't for this ayah, then Allah is saying, وَمِمَّا يَعْرَشُونَ, we couldn't harvest the bee. The bee wouldn't live in what we built them. But instead now, because Allah put that part of the ayah in, we can harvest the bee, we can build these homes for the bee, and make more honey. And then it goes on, the next ayah talks about the bee. Follow the way the Lord has laid down for you. As we know, the bee, when it flies towards the flower, it's flying in all these different directions, not a straight line. Why? Because the bee has a different vision than us. They see the way the light reflects from the flower. And then when it grabs the nectar, it does a process in its stomach to create the honey, which is healing for mankind. And indeed, that is a sign for the people who give thought. Subhanallah. For the people who give thought. The people who give thought of that ayah. And this is not about how amazing the bee is. And it's a pretty cool insect. But there's many signs we can take for it. First, the miracle of the Quran. That Allah references the bee as what? As a female. And subhanallah, they only discovered that only the female honeybee gets the honey, not the male honeybee. But not only was it mentioned in the Quran in these two ayahs, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned it in the hadith. And before he starts the hadith, what does he do? He swears by Allah, by the one whose hand is the soul of Muhammad ﷺ. He swears by Allah. So we know this is important. He says the believer is like the bee. The believer is like the bee. Al-mu'min is like the bee. So what are the lessons we can take from the bee? The hadith keeps going on, and first thing it references, the bee eats well. The bee eats well. It only finds the purest flower. It doesn't go and find a flower that's immature, a flower that's rotten, a flower that's been visited by another bee. No, it finds the purest flower, and that's what the bee visits and pollinates. Are we doing that as Muslims? Are we finding the best food for us? And I'm not saying halal or haram. SubhanAllah, that's one thing all Muslims agree that we should eat halal. There might be a difference of opinion, Ahl Kitab or Zabiha, but still, we all eat halal. I was talking to a friend in UK, he said, you'll find the person who commits all the sins in the world, but when it comes to eating halal, that's one thing he will not forego on. But it's beyond that. Are we eating that which is good for us? Are we eating that which is healthy for us? You know, even my own home, I'm trying to convert from just normal processed food to organic food, because it's good for me. I mean, everything in its mother, what? Causes cancer these days. So we'll eat that which is well. But on top of that, is the money that we're buying the good food with, is that halal? Are we considering that halal? Or are we going out and making $1 any way we can? By any means necessary, we want to make money. If it means robbing, and when I say robbing, not physically stealing, but conning somebody into giving you money by selling them a bad product or this or that, whatever it may be. I'm my younger brother, we had a car in our family, my wife had it was a Honda Accord. And it went to my mother, from my wife to my mother, to my siblings. Then it ended up with my brother Bassem. And he said, I'm going to drive this car to the ground. I'm going to drive it. He ended up having 5 kids and was still driving a Honda Accord, because he was going to live by that word that he took. And he didn't realize a Honda can drive for a long time. So 15 years into it, the transmission goes out. He had a bullet in the radiator somehow. He blew a tire, didn't pass emissions anymore. He said, I think this is a sign that I need to get rid of the Honda. So he goes to a dealership, gets a new car. A friend of his sees him and says, what did you do with the Honda? I'd like to buy that from you. He said, I won't sell it to you. He didn't feel it was right to sell him a car that he didn't trust. He disclosed this information to the dealer and said, give me whatever you want for it. But if he wanted to, he could have cleaned it a little bit and probably sold it for maybe a couple $1,000s more. But he didn't feel that money was right to sell somebody an imperfect product, a product with problems. Why? Because he didn't want that haram money to come into his house. He didn't want to take advantage of a situation. So think about that, dear brothers and sisters. Are you eating well? Is the money that you're putting on the table for your kids, is that halal money? Second, the way it takes from the flower is pure. The way the bee takes, the nectar is pure from the flower. Why do we say that? The bee does a give and take. It doesn't only take from the flower, it gives to the flower. And what it gives to the flower is more beneficial to the flower than what it takes. When it pollinates the flower, it allows the flower to grow, to have more flowers. And what it takes is just a little nectar. Do we do that in the relationships that we're in, dear brothers and sisters? With our parents, with our children, with our co-workers, with our friends, with our spouses? Are we giving and taking? Or are we that person who's just taking? We know those friends that we have that when they call us, you look at your cell phone, oh, he wants something. I have those friends. I know them right away. I actually pick up the phone and say, what do you need? Because I know they want something. They might do a little small talk, but at the end of the day, they want something. And that's fine. We all have those friends. We do it ourselves. We have a friend, I know a mechanic. I know this, I know that, I know this. But instead of just doing that, pick up the phone one time and just call somebody just to say hi. A friend of mine last week just gave me a call out of the blue and said, let's do lunch. That means so much. He asked for nothing. He just wanted to talk and hang out and catch up. That means a lot. Pick up the phone one time and say, I haven't talked to Fulan in so long. Let me call him and say hi. So what's number 2? Let's have a give and take in our relationships, with all the relationships that we're in. Number 3, the bee does not break the flower. We think the bee is light, but compared to the little petal that it could sit on to pollinate, it's very heavy. It's a very heavy insect. So what does it do? It flaps its wings and it hovers over the flower. It hovers over the flower. Because what? It doesn't want to put stress in the flower. Are we doing that, dear brothers and sisters? Or are we putting stress in our relationships? Are we demanding, and causing the stress until what? That relationship with your parents, your children, your spouse, your co-workers, your friends breaks. Because we demand so much. There was that story about, I'm not sure, it happened maybe a couple weeks ago or a month ago in New York, where a man demanded from his wife that he wanted goat meat for dinner. And his wife, what did she do? She made a vegetarian meal. And he got mad and he beat her till she died. Subhanallah. Astaghfirullah al-Azim. Just for not having the right meal. Are we demanding that much? Are we that selfish to do something like that, dear brothers and sisters? The Prophet ﷺ, Anas radiallahu anhu, said, I served for the Prophet of Allah for 10 years as a boy. Now everything I did is according to what he liked. And he was talking about the Prophet ﷺ. But he would never hear the word uff, or why did you do it like this, from the Prophet ﷺ. That's how the Prophet treated people. What happens is with us, when we look at a grand white piece of paper, but we like to pick out that little dot on the paper. We pick out the imperfections in our friends, in our family, in our spouses or whatever, instead of looking at the grand picture, the pure things about them, instead of picking out what's wrong with everybody. Don't put a demand in the relationship you're in. Number 4, the bee does not cause corruption. It doesn't cause corruption. When the bee flies, as we know, if another bee has visited the flower, the bee doesn't visit that flower. Why? Because if it did, it will kill the flower. It has to visit a flower from only the bees from its hive have visited. So sometimes this little creature will fly 3 miles away from its hive just to find the flower. It struggles and it does all this effort for what? Because it knows what it has to do. Even the short lifespan of a bee, it doesn't live that long. We're not talking about years, we're talking about weeks. And what does it produce? 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey. That's all it produces. Think about how many bees you're going to need just to get that 1 teaspoon. 12 if you need to do the math. But what does it do? We don't do that, dear brothers and sisters. How many times have you gone down the street and you see a store, whatever it may be, a shawarma shop, and right next to the shawarma shop you see another shawarma shop. Same exact thing. Abdullah shawarma and Ahmed shawarma. Right next door. Why are we doing this? Why not open a shop down in a different zip code, different town, a slightly different area, even at least a mile down the road? But instead, we compete. The bees are willing to fly somewhere else. We should do the same thing. We shouldn't be stingy. We shouldn't be jealous. We should help each other out. The 5th thing, the bee helps its community at whole. As we know, when the bee comes back from a flower, what does it do? Something called the bee dance. Why does it do the bee dance? Not because it's happy it brought honey. It's actually telling the other bees where the flowers are. It dances in this mysterious way and tells the bees, hey, here's where the honey is. It shares its knowledge with the community. It wants to help the community. And on top of that, what did we say earlier? The bee searches for what? The best flower. But when it brings it back, it doesn't even eat its own food. It shares it with the other bees, and it eats food from another bee. It thinks about the community at whole. Do we do that, dear brothers and sisters? Or do we only think about me, 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 me? I remember, actually this was at even my wedding. I decided to do a buffet style at my wedding. I think it was a big mistake. But what happened was people came up. And what did they do? The people in the front of the line looked at the line and said, wow, there's a lot of people in this line. So they put their first and their second, and some of them even their third on their plate, and piled their plate up. Because who? They were thinking of just me. And when you look at the line, the person in the back of line, I would say a good 10% of the people, including myself at my wedding, didn't eat because they ran out of food. Instead of thinking about the person behind you and just eating a little bit, putting a little on your plate, being considerate. These are the lessons we should take from the bee. And lastly, the bee helps all of mankind. It doesn't only help the flower, it doesn't only help the community, it's a beehive, it also helps mankind from the honey it produces. Honeybees are responsible for pollinating 80% of the world's fruits. They do this. They have a mission and they know what to do. And like I said, even if it's only producing 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey. So ask Allah to make us like the example of the bee. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر لي ولكم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على النبي المرسلين. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. A man came to the Prophet ﷺ. He said, my brother has stomach problems. The Prophet ﷺ said, let him drink some honey. And the man came for a second time, and the Prophet ﷺ said, let him drink some honey. And the man came from a third time, and the Prophet ﷺ said, let him drink some honey. He returned again and said, I have done that. The Prophet said, then Allah said the truth, but your brother's stomach told a lie. Let him drink some honey. So the man went, let his brother drink some honey, and he came back and he said, my brother's cured. We know the benefits of honey, the healing power of honey. We know who does this? The bee does this for us. They spend their lives just making honey, which is not only beneficial for them, but all of mankind. They're an organized society. Everybody in the beehive has its role. They know what to do. What are we doing as Muslims, dear brothers and sisters? What are we doing as a society? Are we organized? Are we helping humanity? Are we helping mankind? Can somebody say, subhanAllah, the Muslims are really helping us out? But let's take it back. Let's take it back to the flower example. How are we doing with that relationship that we're in? The bee has a relationship with the flower. How are we doing with our immediate community? Like I said, Ramadan is coming around the corner. It's only 2 weeks away. What are we doing to prepare for Ramadan? What have we done? Are we starting to fast on Mondays and Thursdays? Are we picking up the Quran and reading? Or are we just going to wait till the last minute and start fasting? I see everybody here, they're roughly around my age, give or take. You know, when we go play sports, what do we have to do? We have to warm up first. If we just show up on the first day to play soccer field, what are we going to do? Pull a hamstring, pull a calf. I know, I'm a prime example. So why wouldn't we do this for Ramadan? What will happen is day 2 of Ramadan, day 3 of Ramadan, we wouldn't just fall apart. So let's warm up right now. Let's soften our hearts right now. Let's pick up a Quran right now. Let's start praying Qiyam right now. After Isha, pray a few extra rak'ahs. It's not getting easier. For the next 5 or 10 years, we're going to have late Taraweehs. We're talking about Isha starting around 10:30ish. So are you warming up for that? Or when Ramadan hits, come 11:15, we're dozing off? Are we preparing? Are we fasting? Are we helping people out? Are we helping our community out? As we know, Al-Hijrah serves about 600 to 900 people every day during Ramadan. That's 24,000 meals served during the month of Ramadan. During the month of Ramadan, they're feeding all these people. And I'm going to give you the opportunity to be like the bee, to help your community. To help your community for what? Just $175 for one person to feed him throughout the whole month of Ramadan. What is that? That's a meal for less than $5 a day, or about $5 a day. $5 a day. The other day I took my wife to Old Town Alexandria, and there was a line where we wanted to eat, so we just picked a fish store. Just the 2 of us, we paid over $60 for a meal. I walked out there and said, Astaghfirullah. $60 for just 2 people. This is a person for 30 days. Not one evening, 30 days. And we know the ajr of helping somebody break their fast. So we're going to take the opportunity to be like the bee, to help our community. For what? Do you know the bee during the winter time stores the honey so it can stay, they get closer together and they stay there for, it saves its money. It's honey, which is to us equivalent to money. It does that. Are we doing that? We're investing by feeding someone during Ramadan. So to recap, the Prophet ﷺ said the example of the believer is like the example of the bee. So we should all strive to be like the bee if we want to be mu'mins. It says first, eat that which is good. Eating the halal and staying away from the haram. Even with the money that we buy, it should be halal. Number 3, the way it takes from the flower is pure. It gives to the flower, and when it's giving to the flower is more beneficial than when it takes. The bee doesn't break the flower. It doesn't put much stress in that relationship with the flower. It just hovers lightly. So we should be not as demanding in the relationships that we are in. The bee doesn't cause corruption. It doesn't cause corruption. It only visits a flower that another bee hasn't visited from a different hive. It doesn't cause corruption in society. Number 6, the bee helps the community and mankind. It provides honey for the beehive, and it provides honey which has healing powers for all of mankind. So before Ramadan, let's help this community. We don't want to be a burden on the community, just take. Whatever it may become, and not giving anything back. We just assume, oh well, the guy next to me makes more than me. He should pay for running whatever it may be in this masjid. Instead, we shouldn't be a burden even within this community center. I ask Allah to make us among the people like the bee. I ask Allah to forgive us for all the sins we have committed. I ask Allah to save us from the punishments of the grave. I ask Allah to save us from the punishments of the hellfire. I ask Allah to help the people among us who are sick. Or I ask Allah to help the people who are struggling among us. I ask Allah to help the people who are struggling around the world in their difficulty. I ask Allah to give us patience. I ask Allah to let us all see the month of Ramadan. I ask Allah to raise our iman during this month of Ramadan. I ask Allah to make us generous and patient and see His blessings in this month of Ramadan. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. أقم الصلاة.